filter in. Very good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the next in our series of Zoom virtual talks, this time on everything to do with ski boots and boot fitting with Matt from Snow+Rock. This is going to be the last in our series of summer virtual talks. If you missed some of the others, they are available through the Ski Club website and on the Ski Club's YouTube as well. We spent some time learning to ski in the Arctic and how to use Fat Mat with Bruce Goodlad. We learned about saving the planet with Bluebird Exchange, and we learned about saving our skis and our boards with Butter, which was a really good, fun talk, that one. Tonight, as I said, we're here to talk about possibly one of the most confusing confusing topics in skiing. Talk to any guide and any instructor and they will tell you that buying a pair of boots is the best thing that you can do for your skiing, or getting the right pair of boots is the best thing you can do for your skiing. However, there is a huge amount of technologies and fits and brands all doing different things. So hopefully we're going to cut through some of that fog this evening and help you find the right ski boot for you for your next adventure. If you do have questions throughout this, please go ahead and pop them in the chat box and I will filter them through either as we go, or we will have a Q&A session at the end. And then if anyone has any more sort of complex questions or just wants to stay and chat for a bit at the end, we will open up and turn on the mics if I can work out how to do that when we're there. We're going to talk for about half an hour, 45 minutes on anything to do with boots and boot fitting, and then we will go for Q&A from there. I am very, very pleased this evening to be joined by Matt Skinner from Snow+Rock. Matt's official job title is People Development and Product Specialist. What that means for us, though, is that he knows everything about ski boots. So we're here to kind of pick his brain and to have him talk us through getting the right ski boot for us. So Matt, if you want to get going, get started, introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Cool, thank you very much. So good evening, first of all, thanks for the amazing build-up. I'm very honoured to be described in those terms. So I thought we would look at the whole range and the whole gamut of boots, and then go a little bit into fitting and perhaps debunk some myths around fitting and debunk some myths around what makes a great ski boot fit. And then we'll maybe talk about some of the new technologies, and if people have got questions, then please let me know those as we go on, and I will try and to answer those for you. So I think probably the best place to start is just having a look at a few boots, and perhaps we'll look at some features and some things that will come up out of that are kind of relatable. And also, if you're looking to buy a new ski boot at the moment, or perhaps in the next few months, what's going to happen is there are things that are evolving in ski boot technology that you should be aware of from a technology point of view, because we want you to get the best fit first of all, but we also need that compatibility with perhaps with equipment you've already got. So hopefully we can look at that as well. There's a new technology called grip walking soles, and that's a really important thing, and we're seeing that more and more standardly across boots, that when you come to our stores, you'll see them on the wall, but there are implications around that with skis perhaps that you already own. So we'll crack on. And
just before we power through, Matt, could you move a bit closer to the mic when you're talking?
Yeah. Sorry, I can actually probably move the mic a bit closer to me. Is that a bit better?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that. It's the first time for me in my shed doing this. So, to start off with the Snow+Rock best-selling boot. Okay, this is the Salomon S Pro boot, and on the base of it, we sell lots and lots of these different flexes, but we can take a quick look at some of the things that perhaps have developed over the last 5 years, maybe 5, 6, 7 years since you bought a pair of boots. And there's technologies in here that 5, 6, 7 years ago were definitely not available. So the first one I really want to talk about in this boot is custom shell, and that technology is not exclusive to Salomon. So Atomic have a version, and other manufacturers have their own versions of it. And what this technology is whereas traditionally a boot fitter would smile at you, take your boots away into the lab, you would hear much banging, and many would say, why don't you go for a cup of coffee for a bit and you can have them back next week. With custom shell, what it allows us to do is actually pop the whole shell into the oven, and then this molds to your foot. So while we bring it out hot, and we're going to pop it on your foot hot, and that technology will allow that shell right from the back of the cuff up here for your car, all the way through, all the way down to the met head to the front, to mold to your foot. It's an amazing technology, but it needs managing by a ski boot, because it only works if you get the right shape and the right size boot in the first place. So that's a fantastic technology. Secondly, is the use of, we've got some carbon in here. I'm going to hold it up. We've got this kind of U shape. And with Salomon, what they're doing is they're using this to, in essence, remove the energy from your foot when you flex the boot into the ski more efficiently. And that connects into the sole and driving the ski more efficiently. That's fantastic technology. Salomon use a lovely 3D buckle here, so we can change the fit on instep. And then probably the biggest development of all over the last maybe 7-8 years, first time without any errors, is in liner technology. So traditionally, when you bought a ski boot 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, it was a very single material stitched together sock, and it went in your boot, and it really didn't contribute a whole lot to performance or fit. But what we see now, when you can see here, we've got this 4D fit here. It's basically got this really stable material that's moldable around the back of the ankle, and then round the front of the boot, around the front of the liner, we've got very few seams. So again, people used to catch their toes on the seams and feel it on your neck heads, and it's not great at all. So massive amounts of money and technology have gone into liners, and that's across all brands. You know, I've got some boots here. We carry, you know, we're very lucky at Snow+Rock in that we carry the highest end of all the manufacturers' boots, so we carry the best technologies. In terms of categories, we've seen boots change. Your very traditional, your very traditional standard ski boot locked into position is one option. In the last few years, we've seen hike and ride boots. This is the very first generation one of mine. And this one allows a little bit of unclip it at the back, and it allows a walk action, a limited walk action, so not a touring boot. But it's absolutely great round the resort. If you're standing in a lift queue, you know, when you're standing waiting for that big cable car and you've been stood there for 10 minutes and everyone's squeezing in, what you can do is actually just release yourself out of that position and stand up straight. Absolutely fantastic. Moving on to this season, we're starting to see the birth of really high-break boots. So this is the Salomon Shift Pro, and this now is it's a combination of ski touring boot. So we've got our pins, we've got a grip walk sole, but we can also use this on a day-to-day basis, just for everyday skiing. Super light, and again, the liners are all modified inside with seamless liners to make sure that they're not rubbing or they're not pushing you in the wrong places when you're walking. So this is almost, and I think there may be a question on this later, this is coming to, there's always been that question of which boot should I buy? Do I buy a touring boot? Do I need this? What do I need? And these boots are starting to come to that point where perhaps you can have one boot to do it all. It's always a compromise to do that, but this is getting very close and narrowing the amount you have to compromise down. And then last but not least, we've got the newest boot from Darbello, and this is this one breaks the mold really hugely in the way that it's constructed. Traditionally, ski boots are molded in one piece. So they are basically massive lumps of aluminium and injection molded, and the boot comes out in one piece. With the Dabelo Quantum, it's actually made in two pieces and then glued together. So we can see it's got a seam down the front. And it's literally clamshell, so two sides are stuck together. And what this allowed Dabelo to do inside was shape the interior of the shell more effectively. So manufacturers are pushing on hugely with technology. I mean, this boot is so light and, you know, super storage specific, but absolutely fantastic. So there's some, you know, so just a quick introduction to when you go into our stores, what you might see on the shelves, and yeah, just there's lots of options. That, you know, when you go and see a boot, they're probably gonna grill you a bit, to be honest, but they do it with good intent. So hopefully that's cool.
Yeah, really good start there. Thank you for that. I have to say I'm a proud owner of a pair of Salomon S Pros, so I'm very, very grateful that you brought those up. When I was working as a boot fitter, again, it was the same thing. Really nice to work with, so a lovely fit and really good to work with. My S Pros are in a 120 flex, and they're using a Salomon plastic, which is really, really tough. So it makes it really nice and suitable for someone like me who's maybe pushing slightly heavier, as well as more sort of performance skiing, downhill skiing. I do like my corduroy. In terms of flex and how a plastic kind of moves and flexes a little bit between different brands, even if they are, let's say, all 120s, is there a massive difference there between brands? And
yeah, okay, so flex is a really interesting question, because what it brings, this question around flex, what it brings to light is the inability of the ski industry as a whole to agree on it. The number that you see on a ski boot, so when you come to our store, you might see the Atomic Force Prime and it's a 120, and you see the Salomon S Pro and it's a 120, and you think, oh my goodness, that's absolutely fantastic, because now I can compare apples with apples. I know that these two boots are the same. I know that, you know, whichever one perhaps suits my foot, I know that flex is the same. And unfortunately, it's absolutely not true. What you can gather from those numbers on the boot is that the higher the number, the stiffer the flex. It doesn't actually correlate to any force, or there's not a machine that tests flex for the whole industry and says, yes, well done, Salomon, you have a 120 flex boot. It's an arbitrary number that manufacturers put on there, almost a guide boot is probably a better way to look at it. So what you need to do is when you're trying on boots, is you need to flex them and understand that the amount of flex in them and how much you can physically move that boot. And when we talk about flexing ski boots, we don't really talk about flexing on and off. So i.e., if you're standing in a boot and you need to put all your weight on it to flex it all the way to the front, and then the second you take your weight off, it pops back. What we want to see is a progressive flex, where you can control the amount of pressure as you push through the boot, because in essence, that energy that you create there is what is turning the ski. And if you're on and off, then in essence, your turns are either on or off. You know, you're either all turn or no turn. And you can quite often see that in skiers when they ski in a boot that's too stiff. So in an ideal world, when you flex a boot in the store, the point of your knee, so as you flex the boot, if we were to drop a plumb line from your knee, we wouldn't want your knee to come past the toe point of the boot. So if you imagine if I'm in this boot and I flex it forward, on the point of my knee, I drop a plumb line down, it should line up approximately with the front. So if I go way past, I'm probably in a boot that's too soft. And if I can't get there, then I'm in a boot that's too stiff. And having that right flex for you as a skier is incredibly important, because you will ski better in the right flex boot. I think this is quite often sometimes a bravado that perhaps people that have been skiing for lots of years, I should have a really stiff boot. And actually that's not the case. It's about being able to control that motion while you're skiing and influence that pressure in a way where you can control it very finely and very efficiently. A good example of it is perhaps that we've all had those leg burning super days, you know, the sky's blue and we fly in, and then about 10 to 4 you go down and you go in the shade and there's some death cookies on the edge of the piece and you hit them, and what should happen is you should use the boot to press through them and compress it, and the boot comes back and dampens those death cookies down. And what actually happens is you bounce over them like this. And that's because at that point your legs are so fried that you can't flex the boot and you're not getting the benefit of the damping up and the control down. So that's a great example of it. You know, we've all probably did that. I'm going to openly admit I've definitely done that. So yeah, it's quite one of those things. So yeah, boot flex there's no standard, and it's very personal to you. Again, big 6'4" rugby players come into the shop, you see them struggling to flex 100 flex. Equally, I've seen like a little 13-year-old Jeep racer came in once, you know, in a 130 Langs like this, you know, I need new boots, these are too soft, and she was absolutely bending them half, but we were all right behind the counter. So yeah, so flex is a very strange question.
Yeah, I remember holding a 160 flex. I think I can't remember, Langer, I think, and it was like holding a brick. There's no way anyone can.
So again, that flex is very much different plastics influence how boots flex as well. So most ski boots are made from PU or urethane, but there are other PP and PA polymers, and they all have different characteristics, and how manufacturers blend those plastics and also the amount they recycle stuff back in them can really affect flex. So for instance, Atomic would like to probably make a recycled ski boot, but the stiffest they can make it is 100 flex. If they use all recycled plastic, they can't get it stiff enough, and they can only make it in black at the moment. So I'm sure that will change. So you know, there's a lot around flex and plastic technology. Amazing.
Can you just bring yourself a bit closer to the mic?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. The next one, you mentioned it briefly there. What would be the major differences between a downhill boot and a, let's go to this extreme other end, which is a touring boot? You mentioned that you've got the pins and the flex is going to be different, but in terms of the tongue construction, weight, and particularly the angle of the cuff, what's going to be the major differences between a touring and a downhill boot? And then what's the kind of, you mentioned that the hybrid market is growing, and what would a hybrid boot really look like to you?
So a standard downhill boot, so we've got our Salomon S Pro here, will be made of PU. Now, PU has great qualities in terms of consistent flex. So it has a very, when you construct a ski boot, you can engineer flex, so different types of linear flex and radial flex. And so it has great qualities around that, and it's a reasonable price. So again, the market economics of ski boots are everything costs money. So if you want super light buckles, you have to pay for the privilege. So standard PU is used at ski boots, and different within PU polyurethane, there are different families. So there's PU ester, which is used in super high-end boots. It costs more. There's a recycled version that has about 20% recycled stuff in it. So depending on how the manufacturer uses that, it can be tuned in essence. One of the things about it is it's not particularly light. So that, you know, if you've got a 10 centimeter cube of PU, it would be considerably heavier than a 10 centimeter of cube of PA, which is polymid. So people might know that as Grillamid. They might have heard of Grillamid in touring. Grillamid touring boot. Grillamid is incredibly light, incredibly temperature stable as well. PU isn't. So a PU boot, if you get it on a warm spring day, will flex much softer than a PU boot on that freezing cold January day. So quite often you have to be aware of that. But PA, polymid or Rilimid is the kind of brand name you might have heard, is super light, super temperature stable, but costs per kilogram way, way more. So everything becomes a trade-off. So you can't have that super light, cheap boot because there's no plastic that does that. So when manufacturers are making boots, they are always making choices around the material they use, the price point they use, and so that kind of that defines where you see it. So when you go into a store and you see the Darvello, it's 600-700 quid, and that's because the actual physical plastics are incredibly expensive. In terms of you mentioned angles, sort of ramp angles. Ramp angles are fairly consistent for everything. Range of motion changes between different types of boot. So when we talk about range of motion, we talk about the amount of angle that you can get in your calf as you walk. So in a pure touring boot, that's much more than a hybrid boot, and then much more than a hike and ride boot. So yeah, to sort of sum it up, the different plastics are engineered, but every time you engineer something that carefully or with that quality or with that amount of precision or focus in mind, it costs you more.
Perfect, thank you for that. So let's imagine I am stood in a Snow+Rock shop, and we've just had a chat about what kind of thing I want to do with my skiing, and therefore what sort of type of boot is most suitable. We now come on to possibly the most important part of the whole thing, which is fitting a ski boot. So do you want to talk us through the kind of the process? And let's start with probably at the bottom. So let's start with sizing a boot and getting the actual length and height right first.
Okay. So when the ski boot fitting process, really you come to us at Snow+Rock, or perhaps you go and see Jules Mills in Chamonix, or you might go and see Colin Martin at Solutions for Feet in Bicester. The actual process that boot fitters go through is very much the same. So when you come in, we will, at Snow+Rock, we will definitely have a chat with you about the type of skiing you do, and we'll go into that. We'll talk a little bit about medical history. So have you had any injuries? We'll probably ask you about problems you've had with boots or why you're changing your boots, because it can be very telling. People, it may be that the boot you've got is perfectly fine, it just needs a bit of love, and we might be able to help you with that. We'll measure your feet, and obviously that sounds a bit obvious, but we look at your feet in two ways. First of all, we look at it in an unweighted position, so we'll get you to sit down and measure it, and then we'll get you to stand up and flex into that ski position, and we'll look at the length of your foot there. And we're very interested in the difference between the two lengths, and it can be quite considerable sometimes. It can be up to, I've seen up to 2 centimeters, which is pretty wild. And the reason, we'll also look at your pronation, and then we'll also have a look at your Achilles. And what we'll then do is have a look at the width, the length, and the volume. And in essence, what we're trying to do is get ourselves a picture to match up with the shape of the boot. So this is, we call it the Harry Potter principle, basically. That the ski boot chooses you rather than you choose the ski boot. There are some lovely ski boots. This Darvello Quantum, for instance, which is absolutely amazing. I can wear it for about 10 minutes before my foot gives in it. It just doesn't suit my foot. So what we're trying to do is, if you've got let's say you've got a wideish forefoot, narrowish heel, medium instep, we will have a boot that fits that shape. And we will pick that and we will bring it out to you. And that's the boot we'll try on. Rather than, you go on the website and you look through the boots and say, oh, that boot there, that's the one for me. It's got everything I need. It may have everything you need, but it may not. once we've done that, we'll generally bring up 2 boots. We'll try both of them on, and we'll talk about which one fits best. And we'll talk about, we use 4 really key fit indicators. So we talk about the width of the met heads. So the width here. We want a nice hold, heel hold's really important for us. You should have toe room. When you stand up straight in a ski boot, your toes should touch the front of the boot. And when you flex your knee, your toes should just drop off. And then we also talk about the general fit, and that should feel, if you've ever worn a wetsuit, we talk about that slightly too small for you. So one of the things about buying a pair of ski boots is when you leave the shop, they should always feel just slightly too small. And that's because as you ski in them the first week and the liner just compresses that little bit, they'll move to perfectly comfortable. If someone in the shop and I'm fitting their boots goes, oh my God, man, these are the most comfortable boots I've ever worn. Oh, I love them so much. I'm probably thinking I should get you a smaller one. Because if I haven't taken into account that liner compression while you ski, then we're not going to see a great fit in the long term.
Yeah, I remember trying when I went to buy my boots, I tried my Salomons on and you kind of know straight away. And I tried others after that, but you knew straight away exactly which ones are going to fit for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned size of the boot. How are ski boots sized? Is there a difference between brands? So some boots have half sizes, some boots don't have half sizes. Is there a reason for that? Is there a difference between that at all?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about. Okay, so we do our measuring and we do all our 3D analysis, and in essence, that is only a guideline to what we bring out. Again, a bit like Flex, ski boot manufacturers cannot agree what a sentence is. So certain boots, again, dependent on the type, they're a bit more generous in the length. Different manufacturers have a different idea of what length fits. For instance, I fit quite nicely in a 26 Salomon, but in a Lang, I'm definitely a 27. What we use to check that is a set of these amazing things to fit. So I have 3 plastic sticks. This was traditionally done with your finger when I started. That's how long ago it was. But at Snow+Rock, we moved to these amazing plastic sticks for consistency. And they break down like this. So the first one we've got here is 10 mil. Okay. And what we do is we take the liner out of the shell, and we're going to pop this down the back of the shell with your foot in it, and your foot in the bare shell, and we're going to look at the amount of gap around your foot shell. So 10 mil behind your heel. So if you imagine, so we're going to put it, you can see this, we'll put it down, got my left foot here, down the back of the boot, in between the shell and your foot, without the liner. And if you've got 10 mil, then you should be going ski racing, basically, because that's not uncomfortable, but it's an incredibly tight fit, and performance-wise, fantastic, but comfort-wise, probably not so good. You'll know you're wearing boots. The next one up we've got is we do 15 mil, and that's kind of that boot that you unbuckle, buckle it up when you get to the top of the lift, you buckle it at the bottom, and then we do 20 mil, and that is a good kind of performance-y ski all-day fit. So those 3 kind of guidelines are where we look. Dependent on what you tell us about your skiing, depends on how we'll go. We are bound by the fact that there are no half sizes in skiing. So that is one of the things. Shells are made in, we use Mondo point as the size system, which is in essence just centimeters. So a 27 boot is 27 centimeters, according to whichever manufacturer can measure 27 centimeters. Some provide a volume reducer that goes inside to take down the half size. Some use a thicker insole. And the reason for it is that a set of molds for a run of ski boots costs a couple of €1 million. Incredibly expensive. So they make 27 and you can turn it into a 27.5, then 28, 29. So there are physically no half sizes actually in the shells. It may be in the liner, it may be in the. You'll find in atomic boots, they literally, I haven't actually got any atomic ones, but when you get the atomic boots from my pile of stuff, they literally have a pair of something like that in the bottom of the boot, in the bag, and you put those in to take the volume out if you want to make it slightly smaller. So it's quite a strange thing. So the size written on the boot has, for a boot fitter, doesn't really mean anything. It's about using our fit sticks to check those shell dimensions. And again, the same in width. Those boots come in narrow, medium, and wide. In essence, from 97 generally, that's a race boot up to 104. We shell check that, and we physically check the measurements around the foot.
Yeah, and I'm going to play the fool here for a moment because I do know better, I promise. But if I were to come to you and say that I wear a size 10 shoes, what would your response be to that?
Grab a seat, I'll measure your foot. So it's really interesting that that's actually a really, really interesting question. So to put it in perspective, I wear in a Nike trainer, I am a 9.5, and in an Adidas trainer, I wear a 10.5. And that's because Adidas always come up narrower. So what I do when I wear my shoe is I don't buy my shoe by length, I buy it by width. Because there's no choice in width. In ski boots, we have choice in width. So, I mean, I've seen people come in, you know, I'm a size 13 and they go out in a 28, 27 ski boot. It's, again, the process that we run is it's a process where we make sure that we are doing the right thing all the time. You know, and again, that goes around to, if you were to maybe buy a boot on the internet, for instance, you might go to a size conversion chart and say, right, I'm a 10. So I've got my measurer here, I've got my little Snow+Rock standard measurer. So if I'm a 10, where am I? UK 10. There we go. UK 10. Mondo. Between 28.5 and 29 on my measure. So UK, I'm a 9.5, which says I'm a 28 on here. So if I use myself as an example, that 9.5 Nike on my measurer here, I'm a 28.5 ski boot. I can ski in anything. I can ski in a 26 in a Salomon or a 27 in a Lang. Anything else ski boot. So it's a very strange world we live in.
It is, and I want to pick up on a couple of points you said there. You mentioned someone measuring size 13 going into 28, 29s, which is roughly what I wear as a 10. And you mentioned that the foot can expand up to 2 centimeters when it's weighted. How do you counteract that expansion? Because
yeah. So when ski boot designers build their boots, they use the foot in a neutral position. So we might get a bit heated, but we'll give it a go. I'm just going to drop this camera down, so hopefully you'll hear me and see my foot on my measure. So let's give this a go. This might work in me now. There we go. Okay. So hopefully you can see I have my lovely foot here. And what happens? Can you see that? When you put weight on your foot, you can see we've got our line about here. I don't know. Basically, when you weight your foot adapts to the terrain. It's, you know, millions of years of evolution have made your foot this most unbelievably complex thing. It is astonishing. You know, Honda made that robot Asimo. You know, recognizes people's faces and can identify different things. You know, show it a chair, it can tell you what another chair is. Its feet are 2 planks of wood because Honda engineers could not make feet. They just couldn't do it. So they gave up. Its hands do proper hand stuff, but its feet are literally 2 flat planks of wood because they can't do the sums fast enough. So your feet are incredible. So what happens is when you weight your foot, in essence, as you pronate, so as you roll inward, 95% of people, your foot extends and it's under stress. Now, on a day-to-day basis, that's absolutely fine because the next thing that then happens is you step off it. The problem with the ski boot is, it's not a problem, but what happens in the ski boot, because of that angle at the back of the boot, puts you in that great skiing position, it puts your foot into that stress place, into that stress zone, but leaves you there for about 8 hours. And it's not great. So at Snow+Rock, we partner with Sidas and Superfeet, so the 2 major insole companies, and we do some things. So I'll just pop this back up. You see me again. Well. And we do some different things. So I've got some different insoles down here. I'll try to come up to the camera a little bit. So let's start with, this is what you will get in your boot. This is just a traditional soft liner. It has no structure whatsoever. It supports you in no way, shape or form. Good for propping out your doors and cleaning cars. What we want to do is, when we use this super feet here, rather than letting your foot collapse, so we can see that kind of collapse there, we want your foot to look in this nice, taut, straight foot position with a nice narrow ankle. Yeah. And super feet, which is a pre-made product, they do that by holding your heel into this groove. In that neutral position, will A, make your foot much more comfortable, but also help your skin. So it will keep you super nice. The other option we do is a custom footbed. I'll show you this. So this is one of our moldable bags, and it's full of silica. That's amazing. And what we do with this is we pop you on here, we put your foot into the neutral position. It's very hard to do, not on a machine, I'll be honest. But there was no room in my shed for the machine. We pop your foot on there, and we're going to pop it into that amazing neutral position, super comfy, no stress. And then we vac the air out of it, and it sets. And once it's set, we take an insole and we put it in that mold, and then we make a perfect cast of your foot in the neutral position. So once you stand onto that footbed, you're then set in that neutral position. You know, we talk about, you know, when you see ski instructors, they've got that very kind of set, regal, you know, hips, knees, toes, straight down the line kind of position. In essence, when we cast your foot in that footbed, that's the position we put you in. And because it holds your foot and because it supports all the way through, you can only stand in that position. So from a skiing point of view, you stand super, super flat on your ski. You haven't got that slight roll to the inside. So A-framing, all those kind of things are kind of helped. So from a skiing point of view, you'll notice a massive difference. But from a comfort point of view, wearable day point of view, because your foot is supported, and you can see it here, I hope you can. You can see it's just a very neutral position, a very kind of supported, you know, the lower leg is very straight up, and so it's absolutely fantastic. So yeah, so from the Snow+Rock point of view, we do a thing called boot fit guarantee, where if we fit you a pair of boots and you have any issues, you might need a stretch, maybe you get a pressure point. The part of that is that it needs to have a custom footbed, because what we see is boots that come back, you know, or when we see boots perhaps people have bought abroad, they come in, oh, my boot's really hurting. The first thing we always look for is, does it have a footbed? Because that footbed is integral to the fit of the boot. The manufacturer, in essence, is making the boot with that foot shape in mind.
And you only make modifications once the footbed has been made. So what kind of modifications can you do to a boot once you've
okay, so yeah, the new boot, ski boot plastics, dependent on the type of plastic, we kind of touched on it. So the PAs, the acrylamides, are quite hard to work on. The PUs are much easier to work on, but the first thing to know about a ski boot is that you can never make it smaller. So if you came into Snow+Rock and perhaps, you know, I don't know, you know, you bought your boot somewhere and come in and you're like, something's wrong here, it's pain, I don't like it. Whatever you say, the first thing we are going to do is check its right size. And it's harsh. There's harsh conversations had where you just, you know, I've had it, but my, you know, my fit sticks out and I've gone, right, we'll have the liner out. Let's just check this. And I've had boots where I've got all three of the fit sticks between the back of the shell and the person's foot. And the only thing I can say to you is that boot is fit for the fit, as far as you're concerned. because if it's too big, we cannot make it smaller. No amount of boot fit magic will make it better. So having a well-fitted ski boot by a ski boot fitter is always a benefit. In terms of what you can do, because it's PU, because it's plastic, you can stretch it, you can grind it, so we can make it wider at the necks, we can give you more toe room. Heel spurs we can grind off. Your navicular here, if you've got a bump, we can stretch around that. We can stretch around your ankle. We can change the cuff shape. They are endlessly modifiable, and also the liners are endlessly modifiable as well. So I think yeah. With some liner modifications on. Found this one in our boot fitting training room today. And you can see with this one, what we've done is if I can get this patch off actually, they're pretty sticky, aren't they? Only have nails. Boot fitters never have nails. So what we've done with this one, and hopefully you can see that, is we've taken out a section of the denser foam of the liner. So if you just needed a little bit more wiggle room, and then we've replaced it with a much softer foam to give you that extra room. Because the liner's about 53mm thick either side, and then we've covered that with a patch. So again, we can do that down the outside. We can hack the tongue, take the tongue out. We can, ski boots are endlessly modifiable by boot fitters, but what we can't do is make them small. So always buy a well-fitted ski boot, and then if you need to modify it, the boot fitter will sort that out. But the key to it is, you have to have that well-fitted boot that suits your foot shape. So if you've got a high wide foot, it's it's that high wide boot for you. And it might not be the colour you like, or it might not be perhaps the brand you're loyal to. But the best ski boot for you is the one that is matched to your foot shape. And then you can modify it, and then you can do the bumps and grinds and all those.
Exactly what you said earlier about making sure you measure the foot properly and making sure that it's still just a little on the tight side when you wear it on. Because
if you ever go to a ski shop and they don't measure your foot, the first thing you should do is just walk straight back out. Because if someone's taking a guess at it, or you said I'm about a 9 and put that boot fits off to grab you some boots, that's not a place you want to be.
Perfect. So let's say we've gone through all that. We've had a chat about what we're looking for in a boot. We've measured my feet properly. We've made insoles. I've spent some time trying on in the shop, and we found the right boot. Once I walk out the shop with my brand shiny new pair of boots, what else should I be thinking about in terms of aftercare, in terms of wear and tear on the boots, and actually quite a big one, how will it work with bindings and things like that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So we'll do the binding ones first, because this is possibly something that you will need to discuss with your boot fitter while you're talking. I'm going to go about 5 years ago. I went to a presentation in a head office for Vocal in Germany, and they announced a new boot sole standard called Gripwalk. Now, it's a fantastic standard because it comes at some of the problems that traditional ski boots have. And what we're seeing now is this standard coming into the market. So I'll explain what it is first, and then I will explain why you probably might need to do that. So I have here my trusty old boot, and we can see this is the ski boot sole that everybody probably knows. Super flat all the way through, and this is a standard alpine sole. So these are really brilliant for transmitting power to skis, but really awful, as we all know, for walking around ski. So about 5 years ago, like I said, Vocal came out with the Gripwalk standard. And the difference with the Gripwalk standard is, you can see at the toe here, it's got a rocker on it. So it's got a little curve. So a bit like a touring boot sole, but it sort of a halfway house. So you still get all those great power things. You haven't got the rubber lugs on the bottom to affect how the ski and the boot interface. So you get great power interface, but you also get this nice rocker, and also quite rubberized around the edges. So really grippy. So you know when you've got your soup and your Fanta and your bread roll and you're in the cafe and the floor's a bit slippy, it's going to grip there. So it's absolutely fantastic. Grip walk needs a specific type of binding. So if you have a standard alpine ski binding, then grip walk will not fit in it. Well, it will fit in it, but it won't release properly. So it's really important that if you're buying a new boot and it's got a grip walk sole on it, that your binding, the physical binding, has the matching grip walk sole. Any binding that will accept grip walk on the toe piece, and I hope you can see this, just here, yeah, will have this little grip walk logo. Okay. If you buy a grip walk boot and your binding doesn't have this logo on the toe piece, while the boot may well go into the ski, it will not release properly, or consistently, shall we say. Maybe it's a better way to describe it. So you need to check that. The good news is that if you, for instance, if you're in the market for this fabulous S Pro 120 with grip walk on, and the boot now says grip walk on as well, boots generally marked grip walk, you can get normal alpine soles to put on. So something to just be aware of when if you're in the market for a new boot is that back compatibility with skis you might own. You could possibly get the bindings changed. If it's a drill mount, then we can change the bindings for you. If it's what we call a system ski, where the binding is kind of, there's like a rail on the ski and it clips on, then that's a bit more difficult. So that's something very much to be aware of. In terms of, you know, once you've got your boots, how to take care of them. So when you get back from your holiday, liners out, put them by a radiator, not on a radiator, and let them dry out properly. There's a lovely figure that says that your feet sweat about a can of Coke a day when you're skiing. So if you imagine pouring a can of Coke into your boots each day, that's about how much sweat your feet produce. It's a vile and heart-wrenching figure, but that's about it. So dry them out really properly. Again, if you've used boot warmers, you might find that they'll feel dry in the liner, but what you also get is you get in between the shell and the liner, you'll get moisture. So strip them out. Once they're bone dry, lovely, pop them back together and buckle them up. A lot of people store their ski boots unbuckled, and the cuff remembers that it was once flat, and then when you come to go skiing next year, you won't have to get them done up. So buckle them up, put them not in plastic bags that you get in ski boot boxes. So if you're going to keep them in your ski boot box, those plastic bags that they arrive in, throw them away, and put them not in the garage, because mice love liners. I'm not saying everyone's garage has got mice, but we've seen a number of ski boots come back where our furry friends have made homes in them. And also, don't put them in your loft, because if you've had any adjustments made on them, sometimes the heat in your loft can sort of persuade the plastic to go back a little bit. We've seen that. So bottom of the wardrobe, under the bed, in the box, not in plastic bags, super dry, and that'll do them.
And unfortunately, there will be a time when it's time to wave goodbye to our favourite pair of boots and or insoles actually, and move on and buy a shiny new pair. What are good indications that unfortunately these boots are done for?
Okay, so I've always used a sort of a bit of a calculation. A pair of boots will last a season about a season. That's the first kind of marker, give or take. Depends on how hard they are. It depends. But if you say that the season's 22 weeks, so you can probably get 22 weeks of skiing out of your boots. Okay, that's a good starting point. But the problem is for a lot of people that they go skiing maybe once or twice a year. So the life of the boot and the plastic is affected by age. So as plastic gets older, it gets more brittle. So a good way to kind of think about it is that for every year that you own, count that as a week skiing above. So if you went 2 weeks a year for 7 or 8 years, 10 years, then that's probably the life of the boot. And you can start to see it in boots. You'll feel the flex change in them, and you'll feel the liner change. That's probably the biggest thing you'll feel, especially on older boots. That you'll find at the start of the week they'll feel quite snug, and then by like Thursday, Friday, you're ramping the buckles up, trying to get them to grip your feet. And then the last thing you should really consider, if you go to a resort where you do a lot of walking, is the wear, physical wear on the heels and toes. We use every shop of ours has got one of these, made by a lovely company in America, and this is basically a wear checker. The amount of distance between this plate and the bottom of the boot is highly controlled in terms of binding release, and if this gets compromised, your bindings may not release sufficiently. So we use this fantastic Sun Valley tool, and it literally just clips on. So this boot's got plenty of, you can see it's got plenty of wear. But what we quite often see is boots where, you know, we're down here and it's hanging over. If your boot wears through here, you can either get replacement soles from various places. If you wear your boot into the actual plastic rather than the actual replaceable sole, then that boot, as far as we would be concerned, it's Snow+Rock, we wouldn't touch it. We would say that boot's toast, it's finished. So that's, you know, again, if you're in one of those resorts where perhaps you walk up to the lift in your boot, then seriously consider having that amount checked, because that's, in essence, that's affecting your release safety. You think to consider. You're always welcome to bring your boots into Snow+Rock, and we'll have a good look at it. You know, and we'll give you an honest opinion. All our guys will do that. But ski boot check is, you know, more than welcome to come and do that. And then if you do need a new pair of boots, you know, and there is that time, we now do appointments. So, you know, something traditionally we didn't do up until COVID, bizarrely. But now we have a complete appointment system. You can book them online. So if you want to come in the week, you're guaranteed to see a boot fitter, and you get a one-to-one appointment. So that's a bit of a change for us, and it's working really well. So yeah, but if you want an opinion on your boots, just bring them in, and we'll definitely have a look.
Brilliant stuff. Matt, thank you very much for that. That was absolutely brilliant. We're now going to move on to some questions from the attendees tonight. We've had a couple in already beforehand, and there were a couple of people who dropped some messages in on the chat, which is really, really good to see. I'm going to start with an absolutely brilliant one from Rosemary, which I do enjoy. What is the correct way, and we've all been in position, what is the correct way to do up ski boots when putting them on?
Okay. Yeah, this is a really interesting one. Okay, let's do it. So, at Snow+Rock, we will pop you in your boots, get you to stand up, okay, get you to flex forward. So when you first put your foot into a ski boot, your toes should always hit the front of the boot, okay? And because of this angle at the back, yeah, you leave a great big pocket at the back of your heel. So your toes go in the front, and they're all cramped up, and there's a great big space at the back of your heel. So when you've got your boot, flex the boot forward, yeah, so your heel drops into the heel pocket, and then do the cuff up first, okay? Do not touch the two lower buckles, okay? Do the cuff up till it's tight on your chin. A good indicator for leg tightness is you should just about be able to squeeze your finger down the side of the boot. You want to feel the tongue in contact with your shin. If you don't have that contact, if you don't do your cuff up tight enough, two things will happen. First of all, you get shin bang because you're banging off the front of the boot. You know, when you flex, you hit the front of the boot to come off it. So that's not very nice, and you have to go to the club. And the second thing is all the action of skiing that you're doing, that up and down motion and pushing the boot, is not actually transferring to the skin. Once you've done the cuff up and you've flexed and your heel's nice in the pocket, it's all nicely done up, then move on to these two buckles. And these are the ones that we see the most bad habits with. So if I'm going to do this buckle up, I'm going to come to that. You should be able to do this buckle up with your thumb, literally thumb tight. As a rule, when it's done up, you should be able to wiggle this in the buckle. Okay, that's as tight as it needs to be. Same here. Now, just literally do it up, and I can just about wiggle it in the buckle. These two buckles keep the water out. Okay, if your boot, if you're having to do this business over here, and giving it the beans to get it down, in essence, the boot volume that you've got is too big for you. If you're having to use these two buckles as fit to make the boot fit, in essence, that boot shell is too big for you. So cuff first, put it on, rock back, make sure your heel goes back, do the buckle at once, flex again, do the buckle up again, flex again until it's tight, do the cuff up absolutely so it's done up, then nice little thumb tights on here. And remember on your boots, you can always quick twist adjust makes a massive difference. But these two buckles here should not be any more than just clip down. To be honest, quite often on my boots, I ski with these under. So there you go. So, we see people doing them up on the front first. All you're going to do if you don't flex and you go up the front is lock, you put in the front.
It's in all the wrong places, it just feels absolutely horrible. George emailed in the week and is asking for recommendations about hybrid boots. Now, George skis with two pairs of boots, not at the same time, a touring pair and then a sort of a true downhill pair. He's wanted to save a bit of weight, a bit of space, and move to a hybrid kind of boot. Is there any particular recommendations that you would have at all for that? Huge growing market. Also,
yeah, definitely a growing market. Atomic make the Hawks XTD. Dalbello make the Lupo. Salomon make the Shift Pro. So we had a little look at that. So a little bit of a closer look at that. So what you can see in the Shift Pro is we've got pins, a grip walk sole. So it's not a full touring sole, but if you're just doing a little bit of walking, it's great. We've got the milled buckles, and then we've got the walk mode on the back here, and this walk mode was developed for their MTN boot, which is a touring boot. So in essence, they've directly bought the walk mode from a touring boot into this boot. It's got a lighter liner, so it sits in the middle. Now, as with anything, and this sort of applies to skis as well, it's definitely a compromise. So it's definitely not as light as a touring boot, and it perhaps doesn't. Ski's great, don't get me wrong. Ski's amazing, I'll be honest. But compared to perhaps a race boot, it's not a pure downhill boot. So there's always, with anything like this in this hybrid market, a bit like perhaps an all-mountain ski is a good analogy. It's a bit of a compromise in both places. It's never going to be as good as a pure piste ski, and it's never going to be as good as a pure paddle. It's a bit like that with the hybrid boot. The key thing for me is to find the one that fits your foot shape. So go and try on those three different ones. Say that this is the mark you want. You need pins. There's the technique of coaches, the guide, really cool. There's lots of different versions of it out there, but it all goes back to fit. Because if you could just, you might just say, I'm going to have that one, and it doesn't fit your foot, then you're never going to see it. So the one that fits your foot is the one that will always give you the most benefit, because it'll be the one that skis best, and it'll be the one that you ski in most, because you'll stay out longer, you enjoy your turns more, and you'll have a better time. So while there's lots of different models, always pick one that fits best.
Perfect, brilliant. Thank you for that. There's a very good questions coming on if you are a lighter person and you are in quite a soft flex already, but you're still struggling to kind of flex that. What would be the options to make it softer, or how best to the boot to make it work?
In essence, you can modify the boot to change the flex. So where it's going to be really hard to I don't know if you can see this. It's going to be quite hard to see. So inside the boot, in essence, where the shell and the cuff join and they fit together, you can take away plastic. So you can physically cut the boot, cut a V shape in it, or lower the sides. and that will soften the flex. So a very good boot fitter, it's not, you know, it's not every boot fitter will be comfortable. I'm going to be honest, not every boot fitter will be comfortable doing it. But basically, you can modify a boot to soften the flex if you choose to. So, but the caveat is there's no way back. So, you know, once you hand them over and you hear that grinding sound, that's kind of it, really. You know, and it's, how to say this? It's more art than science, perhaps. That's all I can say. I've definitely done it to people's boots, and it doesn't. It's, you know, you start with a little bit and you take them back out and you're like, give those a go. What do you think? Oh, no, a little bit more, okay, and you go back in and so on. So yeah, it's a bit of a relationship with your boot fit, that one, definitely. But it can be done. You can have your favourite boots softened if you choose to. But then equally, there are some great super soft boots on the market now. Rossignol makes some really, really low flexing boots that fit brilliantly. We do one down to, again, with boots that are quite often on the back. You can see it on the sun here. There's a way to adjust the flex, and the Rossignol definitely do one where you can run it right down to even down to 70, I think, or even lower. But still a really good quality boot, a good quality PU. So again, you could probably get a rental boot at that flex, but it may be PP, and that's not such a good skiing plastic. Getting a bit geeky there.
Perfect. And then actually a really good question from Jill Evans, who I'm sure there's probably several people in the chat who have a similar problem. So Jill says they broke their ankle last year, both leg bones and a dislocation, and now has an outside bone pinned and plated and the inside bone pinned. So alongside the extra metal there, obviously they now can't flex that ankle as much as they used to, as much as the good one. So what would be the best thing for them to do? What would be the best boot? How would we create a bit more space there? And yes, they say they're in a pair of Rossignol's at the moment. So is there anything we could do for people who are in that position that can't flex their boots so much that maybe do need a bit extra space for some metal work?
Yeah, okay. That's a very complicated set of things. So you could go down the route of a foam fit liner. So a foam injection liner would allow you to, in essence, replace the liner in your boot with one that basically, if you imagine it comes as an empty bag, and what we do is we mix up two foams together and there's tubes into the liner, and we inject the foam around your ankle. So depending on the shell of the boot, and if there's enough room in the shell of the boot, we could take that out and we could put a new liner in. There may be, because you've got a limited range of motion in that ankle, you may want to move up to a slightly stiffer boot. So if people have a limited range of motion, we move them up into a slightly stiffer boot. So that it means that for less travel, they can make more power. So that might be an option. So, and then also around those areas needed, you can physically grind and stretch the shell to make room in there. So again, stable platform on a footbed. Check the shell you've got, whether it's suitable. If it is, then perhaps we can work with that one. If it's not, then we've maybe recommend a different shell. From a skiing perspective, you might want to move up to a slightly stiffer shell, and then look at either a custom liner, which is an injection process, or I'm going to use the brand name Intuition, but it's a closed cell liner, a closed cell foam liner can also work sometimes. So it's finding the best combination of the available bits that suit that specific situation, because with ankles and plates, and they're always slightly different. There's no standard. It's not you don't see the screws might be in slightly different places, the plates might be slightly, it's very much personal to that person. So if I'll say that if you want to go down that road, definitely find drop my email to her and I'll have a chat for sure. But yeah, it can be done, and it's great that you want to go skiing, but it might take a little bit of time and sometimes a little bit, even a bit of trial and error. You know, maybe we do some work and go off to Hemel and have a little ski and come back and see what you think, and go from there. But it's different liners, different shells perhaps, or even using your shell in a different liner. Just depends very much on the circumstances of that person.
Brilliant, thank you. And then one in from Michael, who is a competitive racer, and is in a bit of a pickle because can't quite find the right boot, needs something that has a little bit of flex in it for moguls, but needs something that's obviously like a brick for the downhill stuff. He's mentioned, is it power straps, I think, power bands, and how they have on a boot, and yeah, how much they have effect on the stiffness of a boot.
Okay, so I think when you get perhaps to that level of racing and stuff, it may be starting to get to that point where you might think about having to. That's the first thing that I would say. So the possibility that I might be upset. In terms of power straps and power bands, you can uprate the power strap on your boot. Dependent on the manufacturer, you can generally buy the higher end power straps as a spare part. So it depends on which boot. You know, I know for a fact that with Atomic you can buy the race power straps as spare parts and move them up on your bike, and they'll give you more rebound. In terms of changing the flex of a boot, if the boot's got a flex adjuster on, that might be possible. But racing becomes very specific to that person. So again, it becomes perhaps, you know, come in and we can try putting a stronger power band on there, or the booster straps, and then see where that takes you. But it may be that you're getting to the point where for certain things you may need that more specialist boot. And actually, that's, you know, when it comes, I'm going to be honest, when it comes to that purebred race boot, that's not really the Snow+Rock market. We don't do any race boots at all. There are a couple of fantastic shops that specialize in that, and it's such a compressed market, and it's such a, I won't say it's it's quite a tight market, and it's very specialist in its skill set, and no shops service that. And as a company, in reality, that's not a market that Snow+Rock are in. Okay.
Thank you for that. And I find a couple of people have asked about the angles of the cuff. Both we talked a little bit about straighter up is more for touring, and then further forward for more downhill stuff. But what about side to side as well, or inside and outwards?
Yeah.
Well,
so, okay. This is Okay. So this was known as canting. Okay, but in reality, it isn't. It's cuff alignment. So let me explain. This is a good one. So canting. If you were to have your boots canted, in essence, the boot tech would plane off an angle on the boot, or put a shim on it to change the. If you imagine this lovely lang is sitting flat, you can adjust it so that it sits to either way. Okay, and that is true canting. You can do that through sole plates, through planing. Okay, it's incredibly technical. I think it's like half a degree on the plate is 1 centimeter at the knee, or 2 centimeters at the knee. It's really special, and weirdly, it's not something that we see in Europe so much. In the States, it's incredibly common, but in Europe, not so much. But it is there, and again, it's done by very specialist shops, but with you have to be incredibly careful with it, because it can be not great. So that's canting. So I think what the question is about cuff alignment, and we can see on this lovely lang here, we've got an adjuster on the side here, and this allows you to change the cuff angle. So if you imagine when you look at a ski boot, there's a line that runs all the way straight up through the back. Okay, and what it allows you to do, if I get my might, so if we imagine that this fit stick is the angle, so it's quite hard to explain. What I can do with cuff alignment is I can move cuff in relation to the base of the boot either way. Okay. So where we would see this is once we've made a footbed, if someone has they're slightly not knee or they're slightly bare legs and their tip and bib go out at an angle and the distance on the cuff is very narrow on one side, very wide on the other, we can then rotate the cuff to even that angle to even the pressure. And that's cuff alignment. So they're two different things. Canting is changing the physical sole, and cuff alignment is changing the alignment of the cuff, the upper of the boot, in relation to the lower of the cloth. So you would use it, use it wisely, I would say. Again, if you've got a footbed in there, what you'll probably find is your alignment will be much better than if you haven't. But you wouldn't adjust the cuff until you have a footbed in. And then a bit of trial and error because it can feel very strange. And so that's canting and hopefully that explains it.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much for that. I think that is about everything for the time being. It's about 9:15. I think that's a good place to leave it for now. Thank you very much, everyone who came along this evening. Thank you to Matt for joining us. I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. My name is Henry. I'm manager of the club's information and advice service. If you do have any more questions about anything to do with boot fitting, feel free to get them across to us at the club. We can have a good answering ourselves, or of course, we do have Matt now on hand to give you guys an answer as well. If anyone does want to hang around and ask any more questions, we will be here for the next few minutes or so. But that is about everything for this evening. Thank you very much, Matt, once again. You very much, everyone, for coming along and listening to us. Thank you.
Kind of seeing the questions popping up across the bottom.
Yeah, that's very good. Actually, I enjoyed that.
It's quite strange. I had to put my laptop behind the camera to because otherwise you do that thing where you look at the screen and don't actually talk to people. So really like that, you do that thing. Yeah, get my camera. Yeah, chatting away. No, it's good. It was good. I hope. See if anyone wants to ask any more questions. I'll have a look at the chat actually, see what's in there.
Ooh, that's another good one. Are rear entry boots making a comeback?
Yes, rear entry boots are making a comeback. Yes, Atomic make one and Nordica make one. The HF.
What was the one they had a few years ago that were snowboard boots you latched into frames?
Oh, Dahu. I'm going to say Dahu. I wore a pair once at a ski test and they were unbelievably bad. They were terrifying skiing. Like,
yeah.
Just...
I knew someone who had them as head buyer for a rival company of Snow+Rock, who I think they only used them on ski tests, just wandering around and never actually properly skied on them. So I think that says a lot about them.
Yeah,
a good one. What effect does Ski Mojo have on boot fitting and alignment?
Ooh, that's quite an interesting one. So basically, they don't really affect the boot at all. They attach to the boot and they sit on your upper leg. So they can basically be attached to any boot. I've done a couple of pairs of them. It's not something we sell, but if you brought them in, you know, I've definitely fitted them. But the only issues are sometimes between, I would say, possibly there may be an issue in terms of the attachment has to be in a very particular place. In certain older boots, you might not be able to do that. But yeah, from the perspective of alignment and stuff, they don't really affect the boot at all.
What's the difference? Perfect. Yeah, that's one we get asked a lot actually at the club. Ski mojo and they help for knees and things like that. So yeah, that's a really good. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, they're really cool. You know, I think they keep a lot of people skiing. You know,
they do.
A bit like the electric bikes. You know, they're kind of seen quite a revolution in bikes around the electric bikes. But yeah, I think anything that makes people ski is just, you know, you can't fault it. You know, and if that makes the difference between someone going out and skiing and calling it a day, then you know, absolutely brilliant.
All for it. All the more.
So there's the rear entry thing. The HF is quite cool because you don't even need to bend down to put it on. The way it does up, the Nordica HF is you can stand on the mechanism. The mechanism's been the closure mechanism basically has been designed so you can stand on it. So you don't actually have to physically push it shut. It's really cool. And again, it's very much, you know, it's a very specific market they're aiming for.
Of course, yeah.
But I can see it doing really well. We're getting some this winter. So, yeah.
How long have they been out for now?
So I first saw them everything's a bit strange at the moment. Obviously with COVID and supply chains and seasonality is a bit it's very complicated, shall we say. I first saw them 2 years ago. They were due out last year, in essence. They were the big noise for last season.
Yeah.
And then obviously with all the chaos, it didn't really happen, but it kind of carried on through. So yeah.
Perfect.
That's it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's going to be about it, guys. Once again, thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you for all your questions. I hope that has been useful. The club will be looking to run a couple more things, hopefully into the autumn. And we, of course, face-to-face events are now back. So keep an eye on your emails and hopefully we will see you all, whether virtually or live, very, very soon. And there we go. Perfect. Once again, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Enjoy the rest of your evenings and enjoy the rest of your week now.